No class in Destiny 2 is perfect, and that is very true for Warlocks. I might be a little bit biased here, being that I'm a Warlock main, but I do believe that Warlocks need some buffs. Even though Warlocks have been extremely powerful in endgame content for years now. But let's be honest, it's basically one build that enables Warlocks to be viable in endgame. Or, more accurately, one ability that makes Warlocks viable in endgame. And I believe the first step to increasing the variety and fun for Warlocks at all levels of play is to nerf Well of Radiance, and Bungie agrees. But the Well of Radiance has been so powerful that Bungie has admitted to designing encounters around it existing. Take, for instance, rhulk and Nezarec. Although they're supposed to counter the Well of Radiance, it's still very, very good against both of them. But the main example of history would be Reckoning. For newer players that might not know what Reckoning was, it was basically how you got the Gambit Prime armor and weapons. But it was designed to counter well by pushing players off the map instead of damaging them, and it just felt awful to play that way. Currently, in the game, the best example would be Crota, the boss fight in Crota's End, because he can break it in one hit, with 1 or 2 hits. Best way they could have done it. But Well doesn't make you immortal, but it makes you very, very hard to kill if enemies don't target the sword. Not only would a nerf to Well open up the niche of both Sentinel supers to breathe, but it would also require Bungie to give a pass through all Warlock subclasses to ensure the class is viable at any level. Along with giving room for the new Solar Warlock super coming in the final shape, of course. So let's take a pass through the Warlock subclasses to make more viable class as a whole. Let's start with Voidwalker. This one is pretty simple. Buff the super. All 3 of them. Voidwalker has one of the most simple and effective neutral games in Destiny 2. Period. It's very good. But the supers are ass, if I'm being honest. Okay? I genuinely believe the damage of all 3 supers could be buffed another like 30% and still not be within the damage meta. Vortex should get a small damage buff and apply weaken to enemies within the vortex of the super, okay? Cataclysm, which is Slova Bomb, should get a massive damage buff and apply volatile on its initial impact and all of the Seeker's impacts. Also, if you destroy your own Slova Bomb, it should give you a full overshield in addition to Devour, giving you more void buffs and encouraging you to destroy the Slova Bomb before it reaches its target. Nova Warp needs a damage buff, plain and simple, especially against champions. But as far as the neutral game, I think the biggest thing Voidwalker needs is a way to proc Devour without getting an ability kill. So maybe a 3rd Rift selection that gives you Devour instead of a Rift, similar to Phoenix Dive on Dawnblade. Other than that, Voidwalker is in a very fun and generally pretty good spot. So let's move on to Solar. Let's all agree on one thing here. Well of Radiance is too strong. Encounters have been designed around it existing, which is generally not the greatest thing. The nerf I'm proposing is for Well of Radiance to have less damage resistance. Reduce it to like 25% or 10%. Basically, there's so many ways in the game to get damage resistance. We don't need the already fastest charging super in the game to give everyone on your fire team a nearly 50% damage resistance. And it does that while also giving insane heal per second, a 25% damage buff, and anti-barrier capabilities to all weapons that don't already have a champion mod slotted. And if the damage resistance is closer to that of like, let's say 10%, we could give back the overshield it used to grant. For the rest of Solar, we do need to do some work. First, I think we could combine Icarus Dash and Heat Rises and make it one fragment slot. And so one aspect giving one fragment slot. And we need to add another aspect to make up for that room that we freed up. But either way, Warlocks should have an aspect that's focused on scorching targets. Maybe have it grant Scorch to Dawnblade, and Solar Final Blows while Radiant cause enemies to explode in a small radius, scorching targets within it. And add a third melee that is super up close. Basically, you just stab in front of you with a sword, applying a small amount of Scorch and making nearby allies radiant and curing them. Maybe, I don't know, maybe allowed to shoulder charge with Icarus Dash even. Honestly, after all that, I think Solar Warlock would be in a much better spot than it is now, and he would be ready to give room to the new aspect and super that it will be receiving in the final shape. Now, let's talk about Stormcallers. Overall, I think the subclass is fun, but it's got a few things holding it back. I'd start to increase the damage of the supers. I'd be a little hesitant to buff Chaos Reach too much, but Stormtrance could use some buffs here and there. Then let's go over to our aspects. Now let's talk about Stormcallers. Overall, I think the subclass is very fun, but not that great. It has a few things holding it back. I'd like to start by increasing the damage of its supers, mainly Stormtrance. It's ad clear, but it's not that great at its job. Maybe we could just increase its duration or naturally give it some super back as you use it to kill majors specifically. But Chaos Reach, it could receive a small damage buff without being broken. Chaos Reach has the problem of Geomags existing, which lets you spam it now, which is very good. That makes Stormcaller pretty much viable just for the super. But let's move over to aspects real quick. Lightning Surge isn't great. I know it has its uses in PvP, but in PvE it's not that great. It does jolt, and that's nice, but we could give it a third fragment slot, and I think it'd still be fine. And one of the most annoying things to me personally while running Arc, specifically on Warlock, is the melee cooldowns. It's not as much of a problem on Hunter and Titan, because those subclasses for Arc do have ways of getting the cooldown back even faster. I mean, Ionic Traces belong to all Arc subclasses, especially Warlock. So decreasing the cooldowns runs into the problem of Arc Traces existing and being spammed and letting Warlock spam abilities already. You see where I'm getting at here. So we could decrease the melee cooldowns a little bit, but there's not a whole lot of room to do that. Basically, Stormcaller's in this strange spot where the supers aren't so great. So nobody really uses it unless it's Arc Surge and people put on Geomag stabilizers. And it doesn't have as much built-in protection as the other Arc subclasses do. Arc Soul helps you a lot with Stormcaller. It's basically needed. But I do think if Stormcaller had some blinding capabilities built into its neutral game, that would help them. It could be put on a melee, which would be difficult. Or maybe Lightning Surge. Instead of getting a third fragment slot, could get blind on it, but it already jolts, so, you know. I might sound a little bit weird here, but by far Shadebinder is my favorite Warlock subclass, especially in endgame. Overall, I think it's great. If it had a bit more of an accessible way to shatter enemies and crystals, that'd be a great help to it. And some people out there will have you believe that Shadebinder is unusable without Bleak Watchers. Not true. Not true at all. But if we could have a different melee or different super, that'd be cool. That'd be nice. I know it's not that easy to implement, Bungie, but it would be nice. Maybe I could do a video in the future about that if people are interested, but like, let's be honest, Gunslinger has 4 different melees and 3 supers, while all the Darkness subclasses have 1 super and 1 melee, without aspects giving heavy melees. Other than that, I think the main issues with Shadebinder are the same issues with all the Stasis subclasses. Shards taking an aspect slot, relatively low damage, and power creep. And I'll probably be making a video on my problems with stasis and how to rework it in the near future, so keep an eye out for that. Anyways, we're going to move on to Broodweaver. Yeah, it needs a few tweaks here and there to interact with threadlings and tangles a little more. Right now, it's fun. I prefer Stasis Arc and Void, but I'd definitely use it over Solar if I had the choice. Personally, I know a lot of people disagree with that, and a lot of people really, really like Broodweaver. It's just not for me. I have no complaints with it. It's good. The super has good damage. Now that threadlings are buffed, it does a lot more damage. Now, Weave Walk is pretty good. It's really good. It's a lot of damage resistance. Sure, you can't attack, and your damage is lowered through things that could attack in it. Oh well. Also, they buffed the Wanderer, which suspends enemies. Suspend got nerfed, but Strand and me, we don't get along unless it's on Titan. Broodweaver, though, it's good, just not my thing. Of course, reworks to exotics, and getting exotics that buff supers would be nice. But maybe those are videos we could talk about another time. Anyways, tell me your thoughts in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you think. Also, you know, the usual stuff like comment, subscribe, all that really helps. I have a Discord server if you'd like to join. I really want to start doing LFG and things like that. So yeah, that's in the pinned comment down below if you want to check that out. And yeah, I'll see you next time.